Well, it is noon here in Happy Valley, I can tell, because the chimes on Old Main are ringing. It must be time for the Penn State Alumni Association's virtual speaker series. Thank you all for joining us. I see the Zoom room is filling up and we are now live streaming on Facebook. We have a great presentation lined up for you. We are going to be looking at Project Owlnet, and we will be talking to Keely Tolley Roen, the Associate Professor of and Program Coordinator for Wildlife Technology. She has been there for 20 years at Penn State Du Bois, and we look forward to sharing the great work that she's doing with the Saw-Whet Owl, the smallest owl in Pennsylvania. It's the northern Saw-Whet Owl. You'll see some great pictures, hear about the great work that she's doing, the research that she is doing in just a couple minutes. As always, we'd love to know who you are and where you're zooming in from or where you're watching on Facebook Live. Go ahead and drop that information in the chat and Zoom or in the comments on Facebook so we can welcome you in to today's virtual speaker series presented by the Penn State Alumni Association. We'll be getting started in just a minute. Thank you for joining us. I see Anita Collins joining us from Kingston, New York. I used to live in Kingston, New York for a while there. Welcome, Anita. Lisa LeBlue from First Commonwealth Advisors in Du Bois, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Lisa. We'll be getting started in just a minute. You're watching the Penn State Alumni Association's virtual speaker series. Where else would you rather be than a Zoom full of Penn Staters? Good afternoon and thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual speaker series. This session is being recorded. Live closed captions are available for this event. You can access them by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of the Zoom video window and then clicking show subtitle. You may also customize your caption view by clicking the stream to text link posted in the chat. We are live streaming today's presentation, and the live stream has been made possible through the gracious support of a donor and the Fund for Access, Ideas, and Audacious Goals. Today's presentation will be archived and available on our website after the event. This afternoon, we welcome Keely Tolley Roen, an associate teaching professor of and program coordinator for wildlife technology, where she has been for 20 years. She is a wildlife ecologist by training and serves on the Pennsylvania chapter of the Wildlife Society. She earned a BA in biology from the University of Pennsylvania and an MS in ecology from Penn State. Her main research interest is foraging or feeding behavior and how different habits and different species impact how animals find and eat their food. Before joining the Wildlife Technology Department, she worked on the field, laboratory, and office side of natural resource management as an environmental consultant, a laboratory technician, and a data specialist for the National Park Service. She enjoys kayaking, hiking, reading, bird watching, fishing, and scary movies. Now's the time of year for you then, Keely. Her husband, Garrett, is the Penn State Du Bois campus registrar, and they share 3 wonderful children. She'll present today on Project Owlnet, which is an international effort meant to monitor populations of the northern Saw-Whet owl. Pennsylvania's smallest owl, the northern Saw-Whet owls are no larger than a can of soda when fully grown. Second-year students in the Wildlife Technology program have taken part by capturing and banding these owls during their fall migration since 2001. The station, which only runs a few weeks per year, has faced many challenges, including a location change, bad weather, poor migration years, and handling of public visitors. Despite this, students, faculty, alumni, and friends of the program look forward to this period every year. Keely will address some of the highlights of banding Saw-Whet owls and how you can participate. I'm going to turn the program over to Keely Tolley Roen. Thanks for joining us, Keely.
Thanks for having me today, Paul. I really appreciate that and that introduction. And I want to thank the Penn State Alumni Association for being so supportive of faculty and students and alums at all the campuses and from all the campuses. So I'm pretty excited to share with you today a presentation near and dear to my heart about our banding program at Penn State Du Bois, which focuses on integrating second-year students in our wildlife technology program into a real-life field experience. So I'm going to get my slideshow going. And if that looks good to you, I am ready to go. Thumbs up.
Looks good.
Good, excellent. So the title of my talk is Celebrating 20 Years of Northern Saw-Whet Owl Banding at PSU Du Bois, because last year, 2020, although a year that many people would prefer to forget, was in fact our 20th year of banding Saw-Whet owls in the wildlife technology program at our Penn State campus. And as Paul said, I'm an associate teaching professor of wildlife technology. So as teaching faculty, my focus is really on teaching and research with undergraduates and getting them involved in science and the process of research. And I'm also the program coordinator for the wildlife technology program. So just a little tiny bit of background on Penn State Du Bois, because we're such a small campus and some of the alums that are with us today may not be as familiar with our campus. We are about 65 miles west of State College. You pretty much just take I-80 west and you can't miss the Du Bois exit, and about 100 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. So it takes about 2 hours to get to downtown Pittsburgh from the Du Bois campus. We have a great close proximity to multiple state parks, state forests, and Allegheny National Forests. And we're very lucky to be able to make use of these public spaces in our program. We are the only campus, we're a little bit unique, we're the only campus offering an Associate of Science in Wildlife Technology. That has been around on our campus since 1970. That has changed a little bit in terms of the purpose of that Associate of Science in Wildlife Technology. It's no longer really considered a terminal degree, although some students complete their time here after 2 years. But the majority will go on for 2 more years to finish with a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife and Fisheries Science at University Park. And we have a really great relationship in the College of Agricultural Sciences that allows us to keep our students at our small campus for 3 years, and then 1 year at University Park to complete their education there. So in that 4-year period, they can get the 2-year degree and the 4-year degree, which seems to work out very well for them. Our station, our owl banding station, does not actually occur on campus. It occurs about 35 to 40 minutes north of the Penn State Du Bois campus. It's on, as you will see later, a large piece of private property, kind of a set way back from the main roads outside of Ridgeway, so a little bit south of Ridgeway, if you're familiar with where that is. So this is, if you didn't see the pictures before, this is a fully grown northern Saw-Whet owl. It is Pennsylvania's smallest owl, and it is about the size of a can of soda or pop, depending on where you're from. We're a soda family. It eats small mammals, primarily. Mice are its #1 food source, but it could be voles, moles. It will eat small reptiles or amphibians. It will eat small birds if given the opportunity, but small mammals are really the primary source of its diet. And it's at a little bit of a disadvantage in some ways because it's so tiny, it's preyed upon by all other owl species, including the eastern screech owl, which isn't that much bigger than, you'll see a picture later, it's not that much bigger than an adult northern saw-whet. But they have some ways to kind of avoid detection. They're highly nocturnal, which I'll talk about, and they stick to really dense forests, which gives them some protective cover. Small mammals could also eat them if they found their nests, but other owl species are kind of the main predators that they need to avoid. And as I mentioned just a second ago, they are highly nocturnal. So some owls you may be more familiar with because you might see them out at dawn or dusk or during the day. So barred owls or great horned owls, it's not that uncommon to see them hunting during some daylight hours. Well, this owl, because everything else hunts it, can't really do that. So that's not a great strategy for it. So they are highly nocturnal, which even though they're quite a common owl, we don't often see them for that reason. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about their range, and I'm going to focus quite a bit on Pennsylvania. So just so you know, the whole population, most owls, individual owls, migrate either south or to lower elevations for the winter. But a few, for whatever reason, do stay more localized. So if they have all of their needs met in that immediate area or close to that immediate area, then they don't move as much. The owls that we catch primarily when they're coming through Pennsylvania are those that are migrating. Populations peak roughly every 4 years. As I'll talk about later, our station, which is really a small operation compared to some other stations, we don't really see a strong fluctuation that corresponds to that 4-year peak. And we think that that rough 4-year peak is probably tied to small mammal population availability in Canada. So when those small mammal populations peak, then there's enough food for juveniles that year. And we actually see a lot of what we call hatch year birds, which are essentially first year birds. They do migrate at night. Again, they're highly nocturnal, and there's several known migration routes across the continent. What's kind of exciting is that we didn't really know these migration routes until really the past couple of decades. And the project I'm going to talk about to you, which is Project Owlnet, which is what we're a part of. The Eastern North American population, which is a little bit different, or I should say is actually quite a bit different from the Western population. The Northeastern population migrates, the ones that do migrate, roughly between Canada all the way down occasionally to Georgia. And we do see some breeding in Pennsylvania into northern Pennsylvania, although there are a couple pockets through the Appalachian region where they do see some breeding saw-whets. But throughout Pennsylvania, they're really restricted to the northern half of the state, is where we might see them breeding during those summer months or spring months. So I've mentioned a couple of times that our station is a part of Project Owlnet, and I just want to spend a second talking about Project Owlnet because we would have never been involved with this if it wasn't for Project Owlnet. It started in 1994 to monitor the migratory ecology and population dynamics of the northern saw-whet owl, focusing primarily on that one species. It made it easier to design specific methods for capturing those birds. And because we really don't know much about population levels of this species or exactly when and how they migrated. So as I said, prior to this, little was known about northern saw-whet owl migration. So it's kind of exciting to think that we're a part of something where we're learning more about this relatively common species, but something that most people don't see. Project Owlnet provides us a lot of guidance. We would not have been able to get started without them, but they provide guidance on things like standardized methods, capture techniques. They provide aging and sexing resources, which are very important, and analytical tools. And they're made up of a network of Canadian and US stations. I'm going to show you a map in a second, which are run by both professionals and committed volunteers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And because there's now over 100 stations, that are part of Project Owlnet, it's really provided a wealth of information on migration routes, timing, population status, information we really didn't know before the project started. And if anyone wants to check out the Project Owlnet website or their Facebook page, you can go ahead and find either of those there. So this is an older map. I have to say that a lot of people that administer Project Owlnet, the administration part, it's really a labor of love. Most of them are busy with other jobs. So sometimes it's hard to get some things like this updated, but this is a 2013 station map. The red dots are those that were currently active over that fall season. In 2013, they did mark some that were inactive, which may now still be inactive or may be active, but it gives you an overall picture of the distribution of sites. And you can see Pennsylvania is pretty well covered. So when we first started in 2001, even though I had some banding experience and another faculty member who was the program coordinator at the time, Hoagie Schott, was a very experienced bander, we didn't really know what we were doing. So we took the protocols and adapted them from other stations. We tried our best to make it work. We picked a location kind of opportunistically, but there were some things that made it a little bit more challenging. But first, I should say what our goal was. So our goal was really not necessarily collecting all this scientific data. So some stations are open for months. They have professional and volunteer staff, and they collect a ton of data. I mean, they capture hundreds of owls. We do not. Our main goal was really to give students unique second-year field experience. And to provide small group interaction for faculty, students, and families and friends of students as well, to a limited extent. So from 2001 to 2009, we banded basically from an 8-person tent in the middle of the woods in Brockway on public property that was actually, we had to park at a faculty member's farm and walk through one of their fields in order to get to the banding station. It was not an ideal setup. It was very dark by the time we got out there. It was hard to leave the woods by the time we left. There was a lot of down logs and down trees. So it wasn't an ideal setup and it wasn't perfect habitat for what we were looking for. And we tried to do at least 14 consecutive nights in late October through early November, which proved to be really ambitious given the fact that students had classes and jobs, and we also had day jobs that we had to attend to. So banding in these late nights was really difficult, but we tried our best to do that. We only averaged about 1.3 owls per night, which is not a whole lot of owls. And we band about 6 hours, during the evening and nighttime. And that can be pretty hard and cold in an 8-person tent when you're waiting for maybe, 1 owl. And we did have some nights with 0 owls, which was a little bit difficult. Luckily, we had an opportunity to move our station, which we did. From 2010 to present, we have been banding on private property south of Ridgeway, and it's made a huge difference. So some of the things were just convenience. Parking is right next to where we're doing the banding. It's in a very large barn. And when I say large barn, people are always surprised when they see where we end up banding, but it's in a very large barn with access to bathrooms and space for larger groups. And that gave us a new goal. And that new goal for our station was to engage in public outreach and education, which really fell much better into the mission of the Penn State Du Bois campus and our program. We did scale back a little bit. Our dream of 14 nights became more difficult as we really focused on faculty banders only and our 1 staff member. So 9 nights at least. If we can get in more than 9 nights, that's great. We cover the peak of migration for North Central PA, which for us is the very end of October and the very beginning of November. So I think about the weeks around Halloween, which is fitting, right? And mostly Thursday through Sundays, which fits our student schedules better and also our schedules better. And we really upped our average. So we went from an average of 1.3 owls a night per night, sorry, to an average of 3.1 owls per night. And it was very rare, it is quite rare to have a 0 owl night. In fact, in the 20 years that the station has been active, we've banded 593 owls and 423 of them have been at the new site. So our decision to move not only was just more comfortable and allowed us to engage with more people, but it also was just a better site for migrating northern saw-whet owls. So this is the barn. So again, when I tell people that they haven't been there, you know, I say, look for the really big barn. They don't expect this beautiful local wood, you know, beautiful stone, partially stone faced building that has geothermal heating. It's 3 stories. We're really lucky to have access to this property. It's also kind of a hobby farm, so we never know what we're going to get when we go out there. We've been granted use. We have a use agreement with the Glendale Foundation. That's a foundation that the property is now, that now takes care of that property. And sometimes we have cows, sometimes we have sheep, we've had horses in the past, and that's always kind of fun for our students and families to see. This is what the inside of the main area that we band in looks like. We also have an area upstairs that has smaller rooms where we can take the owls for, you know, in case we think that an owl might escape, which is rare, but could potentially happen. But we have this kind of nice open area. And it's got some cool features like these really neat winding staircases. This one, it actually is from the main floor to the second floor. And then there's another one that goes all the way to the top. So visitors always love that. Whenever we have Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or family members, they always have to walk up and down the spiral staircases. But the real advantage of having our new location is space. Because as you can see here, that would be really hard to do everything we're doing in an 8-person tent. It just wasn't possible. And this picture is kind of neat because it's a combination of students, faculty, staff, and families of all of the above. So when we actually go to band on site, we use what's called MIST, M-I-S-T nets, which have long been used to capture birds and bats. We use a specific size net, and we use 6 different nets. It may be really hard for you to see in this picture, but the net that you see is actually the 2 poles are between the 2 sides of this you know, rectangle, and then the net is spread in between. So you can see how hard it is to see that net. And some nights we do in fact catch students as they're walking back and forth. This looks like a relatively open area. It's next to water, which saw-whets like, but actually it's a little misleading because we have pretty dense forest right behind the net. Most saw-whets are not going to venture really far into an open area. So one of the first things that we do when we capture an owl is put a band on the owl, because if something were to happen and we were to lose the owl, we want that identifying band on it. Students actually learn how to band already with another faculty member, Emily Thomas, who's also the federal permit holder for this station. They do that with songbirds. She actually does songbird banding 2 days a week throughout most of both the fall and spring semester. And actually anyone can come and visit and participate, but she trains them on banding. And then they're able to relay those skills from songbirds to northern saw-whets. All of our data needs to go to the USGS Bird Banding Laboratory, so US Geological Survey, which handles the bird banding laboratory, and they're the ones that distribute our bands and require reports from us. And actually there's a lot of permitting and training that goes into learning how to band birds. And if you wanted to check out the USGS Bird Banding Laboratory website yourself, you can see here that I've listed it. And before we do finish processing, we make sure that they have that piece of jewelry, and that jewelry has a unique numerical code, which is, there's only one of those codes made for that size. And if that owl is recaptured or found later, you can report that band and then find out where that owl was banded and a little bit of, and when that owl was banded and a little bit of additional information. So you can think of it as just like a really light ankle bracelet. It doesn't seem to bother them or impede their flight. And we always make sure that it fits properly before they leave. We also do some other data collection. For example, we do age our owls by looking at their wings. And we also take wing measurements and weights because males and females look identical, but we can sex them by weight and wing length. Females are substantially larger, although there is a little bit of overlap. So most of the owls we catch are female, which I'll mention in a second. We do get a few males, and then we do always have a small number of unknowns. Maybe their wings are really long, but they're very light, or vice versa. So we're not able to be really certain about whether they're males or females. Most owls that we catch, in fact, 81% of our owls are known females, and that's primarily because we have a lure bias. We lure them in with the northern Saw-Whet solicitation call, which you're going to hear in a second. This is our old setup. We had an old analog game caller. We do still use that external speaker though. Now we use a digital Fox Pro, which is really easy and light to carry around. But we play the northern Saw-Whet Owl solicitation call, which is given by the males. Both male and females will vocalize, but the males are the ones that give that solicitation call. So we really just get females, or occasionally we get young and experienced males that just think that they're going to go fight the big male Saw-Whet that they hear. And I'll try to see if you can hear that. So there's a little bit of variation to that solicitation call or that song, but it's not a whole lot of variation. And in fact, we hear that in our sleep. It can travel up to a mile. And as you can imagine, hearing that all night long can be a little difficult. So the owl at the top is in complete adult plumage. The owls at the bottom are juveniles. And I don't have any juvenile pictures because we don't get any juveniles. All owls in PA by October are in their adult plumage. So they may have been born that year, but they're already in what we consider the adult plumage and their adult size. Most owls that we catch, 59%, are hatch year. So they're the ones that were born that year because there is a significant mortality rate. If they make it through that first year, then perhaps their risk of mortality declines, but there are a lot of young born, and unfortunately there's a lot that die. In peak years, we get even higher numbers of HY. So we can tell if they're adults or, I'm sorry, not adults. We can tell if they are older owls, so after hatch year, so they could be a second year, a third year, or fourth year, or if they're a juvenile by what their wings look like. So this wing here shows several different generations of feathers, and how we can tell is that the older feathers just look more worn. They're typically more pale. They have a lot of, breaking or separation in parts of the feathers. You can just see it's a little bit of a different color. It just looks like it's been through more. Then the newer feathers, which are nice and sleek and generally a darker shade of brown. But because that can be hard to see, we do in fact have a really awesome way of helping us age owls, and that is by using porphyrins. So all owls, not just northern Saw-Whet owls, have a special pigment in their wing called porphyrins. And if you fluoresce or use a UV light on the underside of the wing, new porphyrins or porphyrins in newer feathers will fluoresce hot pink. As those feathers get older and they're not replaced, those porphyrins tend to degrade, and then it looks kind of a pale white, to maybe even, it's hard to see in this picture, but kind of like a drab yellow. So all of these that are hot pink are the newer feathers. And by telling what are old feathers and new feathers, that gives us something called a molt pattern. And that molt pattern is pretty consistent with different ages. So we're able to tell how old that owl is. We also collect some other data. For example, Mallory here is collecting bill length. It really, I think we just do it for fun at this point, but we match eye colors to one of 4 Benjamin Moore paint chips that we see, or Sherwin-Williams, sorry, paint chips. They seem to fall in one of 4 categories. There's no real rhyme or reason for that. We also, it's hard to see in this picture, but Steve and Sean are taking wing measurements. So remember, those wing measurements are really important for telling if we have a female owl or if we have a male owl. So they're trying to see how many millimeters long that wing is. And when we're really lucky, we get multiple owls. And at our new station, it's not uncommon for us to get multiple owls, not just in a night, but also in one net check. COVID did really throw us for a loop. You can see everyone here is masked. And this is from last year. We were very fortunate to get permission to be able to still band last year, although we weren't able to have guests, which is something that's become really important to us at this new station. And again, one of our new missions was public outreach and education. And I do feel that moving to the new site, having more space, retooling what we did just a little bit, we have been able to achieve that mission. So this is really typical for one night. I think this was from 2019. We had our former head of DUS. We had, that's a former student that had come back. We had one of our admissions counselors who's now the assistant director of enrollment services, and her family came out. So we often host faculty, staff, alums, friends of the campus that want to come out. And I have to say, there's really nothing like being able to touch or see, or even in this case, hold a wild owl. It's pretty special. So this is one of my favorite photos, but just kind of emphasizing again, this is Emily Thomas, who I want to give a lot of credit to because she is a master bander, has been banding for over half her life now. And she, is one of the faculty that rotates through our nights. And we had invited one of our local foresters that does presentations for us in our classrooms. And this is his daughter that came out. And I just love this photo. And you can see our 2 students in the background. It's pretty exciting. And I would be remiss not to show photos of my own family that have grown up around owl banding. These are my 3 sons, which are all much older now, but you can see how excited they were, at least 2 of them, to have owls in their hands. We do not release owls like this anymore. I used to take them out on a glove and you could take pictures. And that's one of the things we have changed. We actually keep them in the dark and secured for 5 minutes before we release them, just as extra protection so that they can get oriented outside. We do capture owls from other stations. And this is just a snip of some of our recaptures. So a recapture is an owl that we catch in our nets that already has jewelry on. So it's already got a band on it. So you can see over different dates, we had owls that were originally banded from multiple years, sometimes the same year, sometimes as big a difference as 4 years. And we were able to see the date they were originally banded, the date they were recaptured, and some of the locations. So from Port Rowan, Ontario, Vicksburg, Michigan, Tofty, Minnesota, Carsonville, Pennsylvania, Addison, Vermont. So a really exciting diversity of locations that our owls are coming from. And those are banded at other Project Owlnet stations. And we also have people catch our owls too. Not as much because we don't capture as many owls as other stations. But just for example, October 17th of last year, I wish the certificate of appreciation from USGS said Penn State DuBois, but we always put the bander's name on there. I happened to be the one that was the bander on duty that night. And on that night, we encountered an owl that had been banded near Port Rowan, Ontario, Canada, at the Long Point Bird Observatory, which does a lot of banding. And you can see that it was actually banded as a female that was hatched that year in October 24th of the year prior, which is always really exciting. Some years we don't know exactly what to expect. So this is an email that we just got this week from the banding coordinator for the McGill Bird Observatory in Quebec. And this was on October 10th of this year. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but a lot of times we get to prepare based on what numbers we're seeing north of us. But I like to point out that he pointed out that they ended the first week with 56 Saw-Whets, a new week 1 record. Week 2, they had another record, and they were up to 146 Saw-Whet owls banded, close to triple our average for this date, and way ahead of any record pace we've ever had. So we're preparing for a really big year, even though last year was really big, so we didn't think that this year was going to be huge necessarily, but we never know exactly what to expect. We do catch other species. I'm going to show you these very quickly, so we have plenty of time for the Q&A. This is a sharp-shinned hawk that was caught last year. There was actually a pair of sharp-shins that were caught. This was a woodcock that was caught several years ago, right as the nets were being opened. And then also last year, we had a huge surprise. Our lab technician, Austin Swanson, who's also a very experienced bander, took students out and caught not 1 owl species, not 2 owl species, but 3 owl species. So normally we would keep these owls separated, but we brought them together just for this picture. There's a barred owl, 2 northern Saw-Whets, and then an eastern screech owl. So it was kind of neat because you can see the size and visual diversity of those owls. And it was crazy that we caught all of these owls. Now, unfortunately, we did have to close the nets because we have 2 predators that were caught. So usually we close the nets up and we can actually take the predator owls a short distance away within a certain area. And hopefully that is enough to keep them from coming back to our nets. If they come back to the nets multiple times, then we will close the station for a number of nights. Some captures, though, are extra special. This picture shows Jenna Lucas, who is an alum of the program and now works on the Penn State DuBois campus as a professional advisor. And she was coming back every single year and loved Saw-Whet owl banding so much that her then boyfriend Tom asked if he could propose at the banding station, and in fact put the ring on a fake Saw-Whet and gave her a fake stuffed Saw-Whet in a bag, and she was engaged during banding operations. So that was pretty exciting. And I have to say that these experiences seem to be really important to our alums. So a lot of them come back year after year, bring their kids and their family. In this case, it was very important to Jenna. So I want to very quickly thank those who generously provided photos. I have many, many, many photos, but some people took many better photos than I did. Austin Swanson, Nate Wyant, who have been lab techs with our program, and alums, Callie Hausler, Mary Brown, Melinda Marconi, Steve Abramson, Jenna Lucas, who is now Jenna Lucas Ward, Carrie Brofil, and John Brennan, who's a staff member that took his family out to go banding. They all provided great photos. And then special thanks to Emily Thomas, who's a lecturer in our program. Actually, now she's an assistant teaching professor in wildlife, and she's a master bander. And things would not run at all, but they certainly wouldn't run as smoothly if she wasn't integral to the program. So I want to thank you. I'm sorry I went a little bit over my allotted time. I'm excited to take questions. But you can see here my email, kat175@psu.edu. Please feel free to write me if you have any follow-up questions. And if you're interested in our program and want to know a little bit more about our program in campus, you can visit the Penn State DuBois Wildlife Technology Program page. or our Wildlife Technology Facebook page. We'd love if you checked us out and gave us a like. We are very active and post a lot of our activities there. So thank you so much for joining me, and thanks to the Alumni Association for giving me this opportunity.
So Keely, we have a bunch of questions coming in. I hope you have a couple minutes to.
Plenty of time. So again, I'm sorry for going a little bit over.
No, you did great. You did great. I think people would have appreciated even hearing a little bit more. Maybe we could stop sharing your screen. I see your 3 wonderful children.
I didn't realize yeah, everyone can go ahead. Yeah, these are my 3 boys, quite a bit older now. So yes, I'm there.
That's great. So a number of questions coming in about the demeanor of the owls, right? Mark wants to know, is there any harm to the owls during banding? Someone else wants to know, they look very calm and cooperative. Is that usual? What is the demeanor of the owls kind of before, during, and after banding?
That's an excellent question. And I like to tell people that saw-whets are perfect starter birds for people that are handling birds. And also they're excellent. They just have a great demeanor for public programs. Now, honestly, if the owl shows any signs of stress, so it starts to exhibit like panting or gular fluttering, or, it's just not, moving around as much, it's not as feisty as we would expect, then we process that owl and release it. And that owl isn't handled by anybody but the students and faculty. But occasionally we get an owl that's a little bit feisty. We actually like them being a little bit feisty. They're in excellent condition. They're a great weight. And then in that case, we can usually take a family photo or a group photo. Or if they're doing really well, we can even pass them around. So the students by then have pretty good bird handling experience. And some of them are handling really tiny songbirds that are very, they're higher maintenance. They're very delicate. So they've learned to deal with birds that you can't handle for a long period of time. Some birds are high strung, saw-whets are not. They have a reputation of being pretty calm. We do know that they don't seem to exhibit as much stress through like cortisol levels from being around people. So I feel very confident that as much as it disrupts their activity, which clearly it does, right, that they get over it pretty quickly. The other thing is the fact that there's so many recaptures, and these recaptures can be hundreds of miles away in a short period of time. So that's telling me that these owls, it doesn't prevent them from migrating. They're not, starving when they get to the new site. Again, it disrupts your night. They're like, what's going on? This is a little bit crazy. If they show any stress, we release them. But in general, they're really great ambassador birds. They're small enough to hold safely, but they're hardy enough that even kids with a little bit of guidance can hold them, and they're not going to hurt them.
Excellent.
That answers the question.
A couple other questions coming in here. Emily, I know you played it earlier. Emily may not have heard this, but what does the SawWhet Owl sound like? Maybe you could pull that back up while we're thinking about some other questions. That when we were off camera, Emily, Keely said it sounds a little bit like a truck backing up, and to me, it almost didn't sound like an animal was producing the noise. It almost sounded mechanical.
It doesn't sound like what people expect. Oh, here I can play it without sharing my screen. You should be able to hear it. It's got like it's like a toot, toot, toot. And believe me, you hear it. I mean, there's other sounds that they make, sometimes things that sound like a whinny. I'm going to try to play it.
So there it is for you, Emily, the sound of the Saw-Whet owl. You said if you were in the woods, you could probably hear that all night, right? Is there a time in the evening, or is it because they're primarily nocturnal that they're active all night?
Later at night, and in dense forest, it can travel pretty far when they're breeding. So usually you're going to hear that in the winter into early spring, you're going to start to hear that vocalization. You're likely not going to see them, although some people do. You're much more likely to hear them. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that's an owl because it doesn't sound like the typical hoot owl or like a great horned owl, things that we think about. And in fact, we're not sure, it could be an old wives' tale, but the thought is that they were originally named, their common name, northern Saw-Whet owl, comes from the sound of, an old like timber saw whetting or sharpening. So you imagine it goes back and forth, toot, toot, toot. So it sounded like that. I think it sounds like a truck backing up, or just and the males will go, females and males both vocalize, but the males are the ones that really vocalize, especially during the breeding season. And you will hear that just over and over and over. So it'll start in the winter months into early spring, and then actually into summer as well. You will hear that hooting or tooting.
So when I saw your setup there next to the stream with your net, the first thing I thought about was they probably catch a bunch of other things in that net. Is that accurate, or is it because you're luring specifically trying to lure that type of owl in that you're really only attracting the Saw-Whet owl?
Yeah, that's the case. So we really, because of the time that we're netting, we miss all, because we start a half an hour after sunset. So we are missing all of the daytime species. We have captured bats. We've never taken them out of the net, but we have just a couple of times captured bats. Flying squirrels, we've caught them in the net as well, but that's more rare. Old site, we actually were in the middle of a flying squirrel colony, and that was kind of a nightmare actually, because they were in the nets a lot and they would chew through the nets. But besides the extra species that I showed in the presentation, the sharp-shinned, the woodcock, and the barred owl, and the eastern screech owl, and we've only caught one of those. Other stations do catch more. Because we're playing that lure and bringing them in, and also time and location, we really don't catch other species.
So Jacqueline Armour Zitzelberger wants to know, she says, we see several screech owls at the wildlife rehab in Center County, but rarely see Saw-Whet owls for injuries. Are these birds seen less often by the public?
Yes, absolutely. So screech owls are much more likely to be associated with small woodlots, residential areas. There's a Saw-Whet nesting in a big tree just downtown Du Bois. Or not a Saw-Whet, I'm sorry, an eastern screech owl. So they seem to be a little bit more tolerant of open areas and people. I also just think they're more secretive. So if you had one that got injured, you may just never see it. I do believe that Center for Wildlife Care in Port Matilda had a Saw-Whet for quite some time. I think that, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that owl may have passed, but it was a great ambassador animal. But I don't think that eastern screech owls are necessarily much more common than northern Saw-Whets. But northern Saw-Whets are just more secretive. They're tinier, they're in denser habitat, and they're not really around human habitation as much.
If people want to see just owls in general, but in particular this owl, what would you recommend?
So I think the best thing to do the first thing I recommend to anybody, if you really wanted to see these owls, is to hook up with a local birding club, because and there's birding clubs for almost every county, every city. You can just Google that. There's tons in Pennsylvania, and they're always welcoming to new birders. And a lot of them are specifically interested in going out and doing what we call owling. Now, the one challenge with owls is that one of the ways you really have to survey them is to use playbacks. And there's a lot of controversy over playing the song just to get an identification or to get closer to a species. Some birders don't really like that. Some birders are okay with that. How much does that disturb them? But with owls, that may be one of the only ways that you can be sure of surveying for them. The other thing is, if you're really interested in Saw-Whets, is I would say try to visit a Project Owlnet station. Now, unfortunately, there's no master directory of them. We have quite a few in Pennsylvania and in surrounding states. Again, all the way up through Canada, all the way south through Georgia, Alabama, although fewer there. But my recommendation would be to call, if you have a local nature center or a bird observatory or a state park even, if you just call and ask and say, it's maybe a crazy question, but do you do northern saw-whet owl banding? Do you know of anyone that does? I guarantee you within 2 phone calls, like if they pass you off to 2 people, you will find someone that knows somebody that does it. So yeah, I see there's a couple comments. Oh, thank goodness. So Nicodemus the owl is doing fine. That makes me very happy. Or Nostradamus, sorry, you're not Nicodemus. Nostradamus at Center for Wildlife Care. And I see, yes. So the protocol that we use is actually based off of banding in the Northeast PA. So, and there's several stations in Eastern PA that people could join. Now, to be fair, COVID has thrown a wrench in the works, as it has for everyone. We are able to host, we're able to host guests at a limited capacity this year. So a smaller number than normal. We're giving priority to family and friends of students and alums, and masking is required the entire time. But within that, we're just happy to be able to have some guests, because it really is a great recruitment activity. It's a great way to connect with the public. If someone was somewhere in our neck of the woods and wanted to find a station, I could either host them or put them in contact with, there's a Pittsburgh station, there's a station in Allegheny National Forest. But probably your best bet, because there isn't really a directory of stations, would be to call, like I said, a local state park, a local nature center. If you happen to have a bird-centered, institute or something like that near you, call them and see if they participate. You'd be surprised they might, or know someone that does.
I know we used to be members of Hawk Mountain down in the Reading area, and they're always hosting banding types of events. And so, yeah, just look for your local bird club, or on some of the other resources that Keely has shown, and you'll be able to find these. A number of questions coming in from people who own property that might want to make their property more owl friendly, if you will. So Ursula says, I have a small seasonal stream at the bottom of my 2-acre property, fairly thick woods, about 20-year-old oaks and hickories. How can I make the land more receptive to owls? I have a screech owl nest box, but it's mostly used by squirrels. Would it be good to hang up an owl box for nesting and roosting saw-whet owls close to the creek?
Yeah, so the easiest thing that people can do, the quickest thing, is definitely put up nest boxes. Absolutely. And a saw-whet nest box is actually the same size pretty much as an eastern screech owl nest box. It's just typically put in slightly denser woods with a larger woodlot. So you want kind of more contiguous forest, very dense, as it sounds like Ursula had. Next to a waterway tends to work. You're not going to really get any activity unless you're in northern PA. And even then there are some nest boxes up there that don't get used every year. But putting up a nest box, particularly high in a live mature tree, that seems to be a key. Near water, dense forest, large contiguous forest, or a very large woodlot might be appropriate for saw-whets. That seems to get the best success of getting a saw-whet. And you know what? I share her frustration 100%. I put up boxes all the time in locations where I know I should be getting those birds. It's the right size and shape and location. And I get, starlings, or I get squirrels or whatever. And that just happens sometimes. So If she wanted to know a little bit more about how to make the overall land more friendly, there's a lot of resources for that. Things like removing invasive species, maybe doing some fencing so there's less deer browsing. Another thing could be, doing a little bit of select, which sounds a little bit backwards, but select thinning, which would then encourage regeneration in brushier habitat. So there's a lot of different things that people can do to make their habitat more owl friendly, but owls are actually pretty adaptable. So if you find a good box and a good location placement, you might get an owl in there. So it sounds like she's doing the right thing and she has pretty good habitat.
We only have a couple minutes left, but you talked a little bit about some natural predators that the Saw-Whet has. What other challenges does this owl face, right? I'm thinking of, have you noticed anything in your research due to global warming or reduction of forests or pollution? What are some of the other challenges that the species faces?
So Paul, everything you've said, right? So it looks like they're doing pretty well. We get pretty consistent numbers. A lot of sites are seeing record numbers. It's a little hard because numbers of saw-whets do fluctuate so greatly from year to year. So we have to really look at long-term trends. We don't really know what kind of impact something like climate change would have. We definitely see ranges and timing of species migrations already changing. I see that all the time, even when I'm taking students out in the field and there's something I expect to be there. It's either already there or it's not there yet. And so we don't really know exactly how that's gonna impact them. Changing small mammal availability can be a huge impact, especially in the northern portion of their range. Habitat loss and fragmentation absolutely is an issue. So preserving larger blocks of mature forest, especially around waterways, would be really important. But I don't really know how much each of those individual factors contributes, but obviously that all of that could potentially influence populations and present challenges. So we even know when we have long-term, not climate, but even just long-term weather, really bad weather, that seems to have an impact on when they migrate or how many we see. But they seem to be doing pretty well. So I'm just hoping that stays that way.
Absolutely.
One more thing I want to add, sorry. I really like to encourage people to not use anything like rat poison or other rodenticides if they can avoid it, because that absolutely could result in secondary poisoning for saw-whets. So, there's other ways, including trying to make your habitat more owl friendly or raptor friendly to reduce, or even snake friendly to reduce small mammal populations right next to your house. But using rodenticides have a really big impact on all sorts of raptor species.
Excellent. I know you mentioned it before, but if people want to get more information about your work or about how they might be able to participate in banding at some point, where can they go and find that?
Okay, so check the Project Owlnet website, Project Owlnet Facebook page. If you're looking for a banding station, call some local natural resources. They can always email me at kat175@psu.edu. In fact, if you just send it to keely@psu.edu, it'll get to me. 2 E's, 1 L. And then also feel free to check out our wildlife tech Facebook page. Oh, and one other site that's just good for general bird information, we get a lot of bird information from it, is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology All About Birds website. So it's www.allaboutbirds.org. It's fantastic. It has a wealth of information about bird identification, bird life history. They do nest watch. They have bird box building plans. So they're a great source that we use a lot.
Excellent. Well, that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank Keely Roen for joining us. And I also want to thank all of you who tuned in today for our virtual speaker session. As a reminder, you can get the full listing of our in-person and virtual events on our website at alumni.psu.edu/events. Thank you again for joining us and for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are
Penn State.